Here we've got the topic of Scientology and what kind of a role that's going to be playing in this case. Because remember, if you haven't been following this case, maybe you have, but just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, Danny Masterson has at least two cases going on right now, right? He's got this criminal case, and then he's got a civil case that the Church of Scientology tried to take all the way up to the Supreme Court. That got knocked back down. So now they've got to go basically back to brass tacks and litigate this thing in the public courts. So he's got these two, and the civil case really is, I think, the focal point, even more than him, is probably the Church of Scientology, because it's really all about basically retaliation for these claims that these women have come forward for, saying that they were treated with they were given the fair game treatment, right? If you're familiar with Scientology, if you're not familiar with Scientology, why didn't I do this already? I should have linked in the stream to my conversation with AA Ron, Aaron Smith Levine, right? Levin. I'm so sorry. God, Aaron, if you're watching, I'm so sorry. Aaron Smith Levin, because, he's a former member of the Church of Scientology. He's growing up in Scientology is the name of his channel. If you haven't already seen him, check it out. It's very, very interesting stuff. He talks about he basically opens up the hood as to his experiences with Scientology, and as a former insider's perspective, and someone who has since left, and has since kind of faced some of the stuff that a lot of people talk about when somebody leaves the Church of Scientology. Very interesting discussion. And so, we talked about fair game. He kind of explained what that's been all about. So anyway, so I should have linked to that in the description. I probably, if I can remember, I'll do that after the end of this. But that civil case is basically mostly, I would say, it looks like so far, about the Church of Scientology, kind of less so about Danny Masterson himself, except for whatever role that he played in helping to, I guess, allegedly orchestrate any of those things that happened to them. They're talking about intimidation, stalking, harming family pets, all kinds of intimidation of family members. There's stuff that they have alleged, which obviously, when we are talking about any of these cases, we're talking about allegations. We're talking about shade. Allegations are not the same thing as evidence that has to be proved, right? Regardless of how we feel about the Church of Scientology going into it. I know that there are a lot of people that feel a very certain kind of way about the Church of Scientology. But we've got to give them the fair treatment, just like anybody else, right? So in the criminal case here, this is how we've got this article right here is, the criminal case. We're still kind of talking about the Church of Scientology, right? Because it's gonna come in, and to a certain extent. Is it fair for that to come in? To what extent is it maybe fair for that to come in? That's what these questions are going to basically grapple with, because there is definitely a certain kind of perception of the Church of Scientology that has been lingering for a long period of time. Whether that's warranted or unwarranted is up to the eye of the beholder. I think that probably the more popular view tends to be that the Church of Scientology, the reputation that it has, is warranted. But whether or not the general reputation that the Church of Scientology has, that those factors that led to that reputation are present in this particular case is, another question. So let's get into what this article is talking about here, about the Church of Scientology and its role in the criminal case. All right. Like I said, this is Variety. And it says Danny Masterson goes on trial for, and we're going to say SA again, because we don't want to get nixed by the YouTube algorithm gods, as Scientology looms in the background. All right. And there's a photo of him in court. As a pretrial hearing in the Danny Masterson SA case last week, Judge Charlene Olmedo laid down a basic ground rule. This is not going to become a trial on Scientology, she said. And that's absolutely fair, right? Because the reputation of the church should not become what this trial is about. because the trial is about certain specific allegations. Those need to be put on with facts and evidence, because that is the way that we do these cases, right? That is the only fair way to do these cases. It's the only fair way to determine whether someone has been rightfully or wrongfully accused, whether someone has come out with these allegations, with these accusations, properly or improperly. That's how we do this, right? We're here for justice, not convictions, right? That's what the DA's office is supposed to be about, and we'll see how that plays out. Okay. But the role of the church will nevertheless be a key theme in the trial, which begins with jury selection on Tuesday. Masterson, the 46-year-old former star of That 70s Show, is facing 3 charges of forcible SA and a possible sentence of 45 years to life. It's a long time, right? So the stakes are very high for Masterson here. Masterson is a Scientologist, and all 3 of his accusers were members of the church at the same time, or at the time of the alleged incident. Excuse me, guys. Let me rewind. All right. Masterson is a Scientologist, and all 3 of his accusers were members of the church at the time of the alleged assaults. Olmedo has indicated that she will allow some testimony about Scientology and its practices, especially to the extent that it helps explain why the accusers delayed going to the police for 2 of them by more than a decade. So basically saying, look, we've got a certain factor that prevented us from coming forward, because obviously, again, like that's like I said before with the Weinstein case, time is going to be one of the themes that's going to come up in the case. With the passage of time, you've got evidence can disappear, memories can fade, especially those that are potentially traumatic memories. All kinds of things can happen with the passage of time that can make a particular case more difficult. And I fully expect the defense in this case, in all of these cases, right, to point out the passage of time between the date of the alleged incident and the date upon which the person who is making the allegations came forward, whether they made a public statement, formally, naming this person, or whether they went to the police, whether they told friends or family members, whether they talked about it to anyone, because the timing of that can become relevant. If it becomes something where suddenly it's convenient or advantageous to kind of essentially bury someone with a baseless allegation because of a particular popular social movement at the time, that's something that could be, really examined and looked into, and could be something that weighs against the person who is accusing. Not to say, of course, that everyone that made an accusation around the time that the Me Too movement was at its height did so, with lies and whatnot. We're not in that business, but it is legitimate for the defendant to say, look, what kind of risk did you have in coming forward with a particular allegation at this time? Like, people were looking for people to essentially crucify during this movement, right? Men were out, women were in. Folks can say that because to a certain extent, that is true, in my opinion. At a preliminary hearing in May 2021, all 3 said they feared violating the church's rules and being cut off from their faith community. If you have a legal situation, you may not handle it externally from church, testified one of the accusers, who is referenced as N. Trout in the proceedings. You'll be excommunicated. Another accuser, Jen B., testified that she worried that she would be declared a suppressive person if she went to the LAPD. Now, and if you were here for the conversation with AA Ron, the declaration of somebody as a suppressed person means that they are fair game, right? According to what I have learned through this process, right? I don't have any personal knowledge of these practices. I have never seen it. I've never witnessed it, but this is my understanding based on what I have learned through others. Is this, people have this allegation that once they leave like that, once they make an allegation like that, they become a suppressive person. Then all of a sudden they are open to stalking, open to harassment, open to all kinds of crazy, wild things happening to them. And it's all sort of like in the name of protecting the Church of Scientology. She said she tried to push him away, but that he grabbed both of her wrists and then pulled a gun out of the nightstand. Don't effing move, he said, according to her testimony. The following year, she wrote a letter to the international justice chief within Scientology seeking permission, quote unquote, to bring a civil suit and criminal charges. She also said she feared that doing so would result in losing all my friends and family who are Scientologists. So, now we're talking about somebody who says that she tried to use the internal process within Scientology. This is another kind of situation where Scientology just kind of naturally comes up just in telling the story of what happened to this person. And I think that is, you know, that's fair. That's fair in that kind of circumstance. Now, obviously, just because it's fair in that circumstance, that doesn't mean that the prosecution can then like run that all the way to the end zone and like talk about Scientology up and down everywhere. They still have to make sure that it reasonably makes sense because it has the test here when we're talking about Scientology is going to be inevitably number one, is it relevant? And number two, is it more relevant than it is prejudicial? Because that's basically the test that's going to be used here. Because even if it's relevant, but it's more prejudicial than it is relevant, there's a good chance the court could leave that out. The justice chief, Mike Ellis, responded a week later saying she would have to decide for herself, quote unquote, whether to bring a civil suit. The letter did not address the possibility of going to the police. Regardless of your decisions in the legal arena, you do need to apply LRH technology as the ultimate solution to any problem, Ellis wrote. Now, this is referring to the process that Scientologists use for I'm totally going to butcher it, but we talked about this again when Aaron was on the channel. He explained it so well. But it's basically this process within Scientology where you get audited, I think is the way to put it. You are sitting with a higher ranked person within Scientology, and you're kind of just going through this process that is very unique to Scientology. So basically that means that like Scientology has to be involved in whatever process that she decides to use to have her grievances heard. All right. At the preliminary hearing, Jen B testified that she took that to mean that I could not go to the police. Could be. That could be. And so I mean that is one perspective. There might be another perspective that the defense then puts forward. But we'll see. Masterson's defense lawyers protested that the letter did not address that. And they argued that Scientology doctrine does not actually forbid members from going to the police. Olmedo barred prosecutors from calling and if they say that and there happens to be some kind of records that are available to the prosecution showing like, it may not be explicitly stated, but here's X, Y, and Z process. And here's all the things that they basically like lay out the four corners of it. And they paint a picture, a connect the dot kind of picture where you're supposed to connect the dots yourself. The prosecution can totally introduce that kind of evidence to rebut that if that exists. So again, it's going to be interesting to see that play out. Olmedo barred prosecutors from calling Claire Headley, an ex-Scientologist and church critic who was supposed to testify about church teachings. So much of the theological parsing may be left up to the jury. So that's interesting. They're not going to be allowing them to talk about the teachings of Scientology, but maybe just the process that they went through. That could be beneficial to Masterson. That could be beneficial to the other side. It really depends on how these things are framed and just like I said, like what kind of dots are placed, on on the page, right? For folks to connect, for the jury to connect. Jen B did ultimately go to the police in 2004, but the DA's office declined to file charges. Now that's an interesting thing for the DA to say, because that is not a fault of the individual, and I'm sure there's records on it. They said they couldn't file because he was a celebrity. One girl wasn't enough, she testified. She said she cried after the decision was made. Years later, she would be put in touch with Trout and Colonel Bixler, and they went to the LAPD, which reopened the investigation. Trout has alleged that Masterson SA'd her at his house sometime in late 2003. Asked on the stand last year to explain why she had not reported the incident at the time, even to church authorities, she explained that Masterson was a celebrity and, quote, his status offers more to the church, unquote. Now that one is going to be a little bit more of an uphill battle to explain, right? Because that's someone kind of like making I mean, if you are looking at it from her perspective, she's making an assumption. If you're looking at it from the perspective of Masterson, you're saying, I mean, how, like you're using that excuse now because he happens to be a celebrity and he happened to be a celebrity at the time, but you also could be simply just saying that conveniently now, right? There's possibilities. So how that's going to play out, again, it's going to be interesting.